Today, I am interviewing a former Catholic priest who left the diocese in Idaho in 2013. Please join me in welcoming Brian May. Well, it's nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you as well.
I'm kind of curious how you chose to go into the priesthood.
That's a good question. Not many people do. There was a time in the Catholic Church in which there was a relatively high portion of Catholics that wanted to be priests and nuns in the 40s and 50s. I mean, you couldn't swing a dead cat around any prominently Catholic areas without hitting a priest and nun or a nun. But then after the 60s and the sexual revolution, numbers have steadily dwindled. And so while total number of Catholics has tended to go up, mostly due to immigration, the number of priests and nuns has continued to decline. Nuns even more so than priests. But so it is kind of unusual that I still got attracted to it. My parents were uber religious. I grew up immersed fully in a Catholic world. It seemed like the thing to do. Neither of them were particularly fundamentalistic, but they were very, very engaged in the church. My mother actually worked for the church for a lot of my childhood. My dad was a farmer, but then after we sold the farm, he got involved in all of these kind of Catholic nonprofits and ministry, and so it just seemed like such the thing to do. It was the world around me seemed so Catholic and there was all sorts of affirmation anytime that I wanted to do something religiously. I mean, everybody would just come out of the woodwork to say how wonderful that was.
Yeah.
And like some, it was a factor that I was gay. I realized that I was gay in middle school.
So you knew that, and you were open about that?
No, I was not out, but I realized to myself that I was. Kind of hit puberty and kind of realized, that I was attracted to guys. So it was, and that was pretty clear to me in my own mind, but it was also very clear that that wasn't going to be widely accepted. That even though there were a few other gay kids around in Jerome, there weren't many gay adults that I knew of anyway. And looking around my town, the only adult men that to my eyes seemed gay and successful were priests. They weren't out, so they didn't say that they were gay, but I would put
How did you know that though?
Any number of clues. There's a lot of I guess we would call it gaydar, but what does that really mean? Kind of a very, it would be about how they would present themselves, maybe some kind of mannerisms and how they dressed and so forth made me think, I think this guy's gay. And the priests seemed generally happy and successful. They were admired by the community. And so to my adolescent brain, I'm like, okay, I know wouldn't be cool if I came out, but I can see these guys that they're not out, but they seem pretty happy, and they certainly get all sorts of accolades from the community. And so I'm like, well, maybe I want to do what they're doing.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, I honestly didn't quite realize that was something that happened, that there were gay priests and just not out. But I mean, it makes sense that they would kind of do that to guard themselves if they're in a position where it's not going to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's even there's a dynamic out there. I've read a few books, including one or two that I encountered through the Clergy Project. Of somebody wrote a book. They called it "The Best Little Boy in the World," and it was all about kind of this kind of Catholic mother kind of guilt that kind of comes on, and that, well, you could come out as gay, but then everybody's going to disapprove, or you can be a priest and everybody's going to be happy. So the priesthood, or for women, being a nun, is kind of the approved way to go if you're queer.
Oh, wow.
As long as you have to
That's like,
you have to try to stay celibate. You can't, you can't
so
be.
so you went
But
into
that's
the priesthood for only 3 years?
so yeah, only 3 years. So I did go to school first. Jerome was a small pond. I loved high school, but I wanted to get out of town. So I went away to school. I did go to a Catholic university because I was fully immersed in that Catholic world, just couldn't imagine anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose a Catholic university with high caliber academics. Went to University of Dayton in Ohio. And I mean, the Dayton is a very large university. Of course, big Catholic presence. But fairly modern. I mean, it's a fairly moderate. It's got some veins of progressivism in the university, for sure. I mean, it's a university, so
Mm-hmm.
strong academics and a good mix of folks. So the college experience almost but didn't quite shake me. Even one of my housemates came out as gay at one point, and there were multiple points with him, especially. I mean, he was one of my housemates, and he came out as gay, and I was right on the verge of saying it. And I think if I had, I probably would have gone in a different direction, because that would have just been coming out would have been enough to shake me off of the religious path, but I never just quite did it. So I got a double major in philosophy and religious studies. Uh, in Catholicism, they require an undergraduate in philosophy, so I did that, and then I had the religious studies. And I joined up with the diocese at the end of my last semester. So right out of college, headed to seminary. They opted to send me to school in Belgium because I had a strong academic background. They figured that they'd send me out. The best academic place that the Diocese of Boise sent to was Louvain in Belgium. So I got to go, and that was interesting. It was a small American seminary in the heart of secular Europe, but a big international presence of Catholic students. There were at any given time between 3 and 5 priests that were on staff at the little seminary that were in charge of formation, and they would maintain discipline, spiritual direction, control, and structured. It's a very highly structured environment. I was a pleaser and academically strong, so I mean, it was a great environment for me, even though it also kind of warped me in some ways, I would say. But tons of
How so?
affirmation. The warping, it's a lot of, here's the expectations, and here's what a priest is supposed to be. Make sure you pray your liturgy of the hours, which is basically, it's just kind of a structured set of prayers around the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
And they would constantly, of course, lots of structured prayer time, lots of concern around boundaries and making sure that you didn't get too close to anybody else. The women, for maybe the few guys there that were straight, most of them were gay, and so there was kind of an expectation of, you're supposed to be friendly with everybody, but you're not supposed to get too friendly. Don't get too drunk and sing karaoke together. That was bad. At one point, my rector called 2 of us in, and he's like, I think you guys are getting too close. I watched you at karaoke the other night, and then he banned karaoke because it was like, and then ordination just kind of seemed like the thing to do. I did all of the right things from a Catholic perspective. I went on all of the retreats. I did the dramatic late nights praying in chapel, countless hours praying the liturgy of the hours, and I discerned. So they say discernment. So discern that this is the right path for you. And
Mm-hmm.
I did everything that they asked, and I'm just like, well, okay, it kind of seems logical. I'll do it. So I got ordained a deacon in 2008, and that's when kind of the promises are made. I promised to do this for life, celibacy, obedience to the bishop, all that jazz. And then a couple years later, I was ordained a priest in 2010. I
Wow.
there is
So
a little bit of anger that comes and goes about some of the lost opportunities of my teens and early 20s that
yeah.
I really wish I'd come out as gay. I really wish that I had had maybe a little bit more fulfilling social life, a little more fulfilling romantic life, and all of that. But there was a lot of good things in it. I got a great education at one of the most highly rated
Mm-hmm.
universities in the world, actually. And a big international experience, got to travel all over Europe and hop around. There were some good things. I certainly got tons of affirmation. I mean, I would get even letters from elderly Catholic women with a hyperactive religiosity, writing letters to the seminarians, telling us how much we were loved,
That's
and all
awesome.
my family would rave about me. And my grandfather, who was always super stoic and who I is also really religious, and he saw me becoming a priest, and he just was intrigued. He thought that was the coolest thing ever. And this grandfather, who was always so standoffish, was just giving me all these accolades all the time. So there was a lot that was good.
Yeah.
I missed some opportunities, but there was a lot that was good.
So I guess I can assume then that your parents did not know that you were gay when you were even in high school.
No, it's kind of, it seems surprising to me that nobody put it together, but I'm told that they really didn't think that that was the case. So that's what they said. I must have been pretty good about hiding it.
So at what point? So, okay, I guess I don't know which point in the story comes first. So you can answer whichever way you want. But at what point did you come out, or did that have to do with your leaving the church, or, you know, how did all of that end and then your new life begin?
So the Catholic Church, despite the fact that I would say that at least in the Western world, a clear majority of priests are gay. But Benedict the 16th put out a memo basically saying that anybody with homosexual inclinations is supposed to be weeded out during seminary formation before becoming a priest. And so it's always very clear, you can't talk about it, you can't embrace your gay identity. And indeed, a couple of priests in the United States who have publicly come out as gay and publicly, you know, I mean, they say they're celibate, but they identify as gay.
Mm-hmm.
They have all been disciplined, really, at some point or another. I mean, or silenced.
That's
and
horrible for just saying that.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So it was very clear that I couldn't really talk about it. Now, within clerical culture in the Catholic Church, there were kind of these oblique ways of talking about it, and there were kind of these odd little comments here and there where it was kind of pretty clear that some of my brother priests were gay. Mostly celibate. I'm not aware of many of them running around having, having lots of sex or anything like that. But
yeah, because I'm sure the intention was to do what you intended to do.
Yes. Yeah. So I know most of them just kind of tried to do what they were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't come out as gay really until kind of right on the heels of saying that I was leaving ministry. So I was at two different parishes. In 2010, I was placed initially at St. Mary's in Moscow in northern Idaho. And I was there 2 years. It was a smaller parish, really sweet little place, more of a rural community, but there is a university there. So it kind of had this mix of folks. And then I did pretty well. I mean, I was a good fundraiser for the church. Bishop really liked me, so they moved me to the cathedral. So the diocesan cathedral is the seat of the bishop and the main church for the diocese. And so they moved me to Boise, to the cathedral. And then kind of around the time that I moved there, I was ready to, I had started thinking about leaving almost as soon as I had been ordained a priest. And when I moved to Boise, I'm like, okay, I can't stand this anymore. I need to start coming up with a plan. And so I started thinking through how I was going to leave. And I started thinking through the finances. I started thinking through the job, like where was I gonna get some money? Because like many folks in the clergy project, as has been discussed on the other interviews, it's a very big deal to leave as a member of the clergy, because you're not only leaving your religion, you're losing your job, you're leaving what you typically did all your education in. I mean, I have 2 master's degrees in religious studies, but if I left my religion, I wasn't going to be using those.
Yeah.
And so
and your community, your
through.
social life, sometimes your family is very, very invested.
Yes.
Everything.
Yeah. I was lucky that at least none of my family cut off contact, but definitely
Good.
some of them were profoundly disappointed by it. I mean, like my grandfather, I was out of favor with my grandfather when I left. I mean, he didn't do anything dramatic or say you can't come for Thanksgiving or anything like that. But I went from the favored grandchild to now the very disfavored grandchild immediately.
Yeah.
But nobody cut me off. And my parents were pretty good. The very first person I told I was leaving, and I told that I was gay as well, was my sister, who also had a bachelor's and master's in religious studies and had thought about being a nun and actually is a lesbian. Um,
Wow.
and she had never formally come out before then, but I kind of knew. And so I thought she would be the first person to tell, and she was very understanding.
That's really
Uh,
cool that you had your sister. And then so
yes.
that probably helped her along too, to feel comfortable, to be open,
Yes, I
hopefully.
think so. I think
Yes.
so. And I think right after that, she started being quite a bit more open with the family too. It was kind of the family secret because she never really like just told everybody, but
Hmm.
people kind of figured it out, you know.
Yeah.
um,
Well, that's really cool though. At least your family is not, I mean, have you experienced some hurtful things within your family?
no, actually, most of my
Oh,
family's been fine. I mean, some of them do put a little bit more distance around me now than they did when I was a priest. um, but not my parents, thankfully, who have mostly been pretty cool. My mother has been kind of on her own journey, and she's very comfortable talking to me about anything and everything, including religion.
oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
my father isn't so much because he's the member of the family that never got a degree in religion. My mom did. And so he's actually at the point in his life where he's like, I don't want to talk about religion, because he almost fears that if he talks about religion, he's going to lose his faith, because that's kind of what happened to other members of the family. They went and got advanced degrees in religion, worked for the church, and then left religion.
Yep. Yeah, as the saying goes, the road to atheism is filled with, or is littered with, Bibles that have been read cover to cover. So I guess one of my
Yes.
questions is,
Yes.
so for you, it was major, one of the major things was being able to come out as gay, but what about the loss of faith too? Did that tie into a lot of that as well?
It did. It did. So, despite my full-on immersion into the Catholic Church from this very young age, there were always a few things that sat wrong with me, and that's not uncommon in the Catholic Church. I mean, there's a lot of folks that have problems with some degree of Catholic teaching, but definitely some of the things that in my mind were pretty clearly problematic were all of the Catholic prohibitions around sex and contraception. There was
Hmm.
never any real sense to it. And even I took all of these classes in both undergraduate and graduate school about the Catholic understanding of sex and sexuality. And the more I studied it, the less sense that the Catholic perspective on it made.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so celibacy as well just didn't make any sense to me. I mean, really, the Catholic tradition of celibacy of priests began all about property. It was all about keeping priests from handing on parish churches to their sons originally. And so they would say, well, don't get married then. And then it was about control. And so there wasn't any real reason for it.
Yeah.
But there's a whole clerical culture that goes with it. There's a lot of reasons why the Catholic Church tries to maintain that. Um, but it wasn't something that sat well with me. And certainly the
Was that
the
something
cat
that you kind of started realizing towards the end? You didn't really know that in the
yeah.
beginning, right?
Yeah, so in the beginning I knew that I had problems with it, but in the Catholic Church, and I think most Christian religions have similar terms, but in the Catholic Church we talk about docility to the Holy Spirit. That's kind of the more theological term, or if you wanted to be more structural, you could say obedience to the magisterium. And that is, I knew that I didn't understand these things. I knew I didn't like the Catholic perspective on these things, but I felt like it was my obligation as a member of the faith to try to understand it. So to try to be open. And so I would say these odd things like, well, I don't really know what value there is to the Catholic to the Catholic teaching on contraception, but I'm still considering it. I'm still open. I'm still open to what the church has to say on it. And I maintained that perspective for years.
Wow. And that did that bother anybody?
There's a lot of practicing Catholics that do that. There's maybe fewer priests that will publicly acknowledge that, but it's pretty common among Catholics, especially anybody that's just a little bit progressive. I mean, they'll usually be a little bit critical of it, and they'll be really critical of. I was always critical all the way along of the male-only priesthood. I mean, the whole Catholic argument on it was basically, well, we haven't ever ordained women, and therefore we can't. They tried all these other arguments clear up through the 80s, and then because none of them would hold water. I mean, none of them were logical, none of them had any reasoning to it, and so in the 90s, the Pope, it was John Paul at the time, put out statement after statement in which he said basically, we're not going to talk about it anymore, and because we never did it before, that's why we can't ever do it again. And he just basically shut down the official debate on it within the church and said, done, we're not talking about it. Well, clearly people still talked about it, but
yeah. That's crazy. I wonder what would happen if the Catholic Church started letting women become priests. That would be crazy, because it's already a little controversy outside of the Catholic Church.
It would certainly change the whole clericalism thing. They would presumably the prohibition on marriage for clergy, celibacy, would fall as well if they did start to ordain women, because I mean, if the one falls, the other one's probably going to fall too. It would probably result in at least a little bit healthier understanding, because it's pretty toxic, the whole culture, the whole clerical culture, this all male group they're kind of all centered on the bishop, and it's very buddy, and it's very, we're going to protect each other. I mean, it's why that the pedophilia scandal, even though it was a very small minority of priests that were involved in it, it's why it blew up so big for the Catholic Church, because institutionally the church dug in to protect anybody in a clerical collar for as long as they could. And that mentality is still entrenched in the church, even though they're pedophilia, at least they finally drew a prohibition around that. So I mean, at least very small progress. but the toxic clerical culture is still there, and that culture of we're going to protect ourselves, and we're going to protect this male only clergy and this tight little circle of trust. If they were to let women in, it would change it, probably for the healthier.
Yeah, especially when you put it that way too, that it's like what am I trying to think of, like a boys club type of thing.
Yes, where
everything is very discreet.
Yes.
And then you wouldn't be able to have that as much, like you're saying, if you have the women in. I wouldn't think.
No, yeah, I mean,
it wouldn't be the same.
It wouldn't be the same, and there's a lot of fear around changing that. Even though, in many ways, it would be a much more, if purely from a practical standpoint, it would probably be a way to protect the religion a little longer, and kind of let Catholicism be a little bit healthier and grow a little bit. Have a few more priests, for example, because they've locked it down so much that most of the folks that stay in either are in because they fear that they can't get a job doing anything else, or they're fundamentalists, or they're old. I mean, because a lot of the older priests are kind of, they might be in a different spot in their faith, but they don't know anything else. I mean, that's where their pension is. That's where their economic benefit. That's how they survive. Their housing is provided by the church. Their whole community is the church. So they stay in, even though maybe they don't really want to, maybe in their heart of hearts, but they have these powerful incentives.
Yeah, I don't, what was your situation like when you left? Was it something that you were able to kind of quietly walk away from, or was it a
It
a
was
big
it was
thing?
tough. It was a lot of things all at once. I had to kind of steel myself, and I made the decision. I had been thinking about it. The ideation had been going on for a couple of years, of course, but I made the decision that I was going to leave in January, and I didn't actually leave until the end of August. And I didn't tell my bishop until basically the end of July. So I all of that time was me planning and trying to figure out and looking at other jobs and trying to figure out how I could do this financially. I fortunately had a little bit of money, so that helped. I was in retrospect way overly optimistic about getting a job in that time frame. So that was 2013. Of course, you left around the same time too. The job
Mm-hmm.
market was terrible at that
Yep.
moment. I had a I left I in January I thought, oh, I'll have a job lined up by the time I leave. And I didn't. I couldn't get one. Nobody really wanted to hire me right out of the gate. They're like, what is this resume? What's your
Yeah.
priest? Like I applied to be a deputy with the local county sheriff at the prison at the jail. And they're like, they turned me down. I think they looked at my resume and they said, we don't know what we would get with this guy. Uh, I just as well. I don't really want to work in the jail anyway.
Yeah.
So all of that time preparing, and then I had to leave. My apartment was basically, it was a floor of the rectory right on church property, so I had to
Yeah.
move. I had to find another job. I was leaving I did have a few friends around from high school in town that I could connect with happily. That was good because that connection was apart from the religion. So I did have a few friends that I could
So
rely
you
on.
stayed in the same area
I
too.
did. I stayed in Boise. I just moved across town and then kept looking for work. And it took me until the end. I ultimately I took a job, a seasonal retail job at the end of November just because I was desperate and minimum wage. And I did that for a few weeks, and then I got hired on with TSA, which was at least public. Now TSA, our frontline officers don't get paid very well. The pay was even worse at that time, but it was still good benefits and it was something. So I hopped on that and went to work for TSA at the airport. And that ended up proving to be a great career. I'm still there. I've gotten promoted a bunch of times. I'm now the assistant director.
That's
So I landed
awesome.
on my feet, but it took a while. It was really, I had to be really determined.
Yeah. So what is do you want to talk about that letter that you got from them too?
Sure.
Explain what that is.
So I haven't really had much contact since I left. They were pretty decent when I left. I hear some horror stories from other guys that have left the priesthood and some of the things where they kind of psychologically lean on you to try to stay, and they play these games to try to get you to stay in or to go to one of these counseling places or whatever where they do everything they can to try to keep you in. They were pretty decent. And so basically, kind of when the vicar general, who's kind of the bishop's second in command, determined that I was serious about this, he just kind of let me go. They let me kind of go in a light of day way. I just announced it the last weekend that I was there. I announced it at all the weekend masses that I was leaving. The parishioners mostly didn't know what to make of it.
Did you
People were
say
like, oh,
why or
that I said something really generic, like that I was discerning that I wanted to do a different path in life. So some folks just kind of took it generically and just kind of said, oh, well, we wish you well, hope to see you around. Most of the more religious folks, said something like, oh, I'm praying for you, Father, I hope you come back to Jesus, or something like that, but they let me kind of go in a light of day way. And then actually since then, I've had almost no contact from them at all, like nothing. I contacted the diocesan finance office to roll my 403b account into an IRA. it all very routine, no other contact. And then suddenly 8.5 years later, so just a few weeks ago, I got an email from I got first a card from them, and then I got all this formal papers from them where they want to laicize me. So they basically want to do this kind of, in the Catholic Church, they use a very grand term for church policy. They call it canon law. And so they've got this kind of quasi judicial proceeding where they want to make me a layperson again, so I could get married in the church, I guess. But they don't do gay marriage, so I there's not really any point to it.
Yeah. Are you already married?
No, I'm engaged. I've got my fiance is a great guy. He's also somebody who has some religious trauma, some recovering from religion. He was apostolic Pentecostal.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy. We've been together for almost 3 years now, and we're getting married this upcoming summer.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's really cool. So do they know at all that you're marrying a man?
Or
do you think that maybe that's why they sent it?
I don't know. I'm very curious about it. The priest that sent it is, from what I remember of him, he's not much of an ideologue, but apparently he was instructed to do it by the bishop. So I don't really know. The current bishop is a little bit more conservative than the one that ordained me. So I don't really know what the specific thinking is there. I suspect that they probably do talk about me a little bit, just because clerical culture is what it is, and they tend to talk a lot about anybody who leaves. And so I suspect that they have talked among themselves, and I've run into a few of my former brother priests around town a few different times. And, I've talked about it. I actually ran into somebody who was ordained just a couple of years before me at my fiance's nephew and niece's baptism. He was performing the baptism. We showed up, just we're family and so forth. And so he says hi and so forth. And obviously I'm there with my partner. So I think they know.
So they know.
They know.
Wow. And that's crazy. And there's not even hopefully there's at least somebody within that group of people that's happy for you.
I think so. I mean, I think there's some of them that would probably want to leave. I mean, and I'm hoping. I mean, maybe somebody finds their way to these videos. I mean, that's kind of what the Clergy Project is all about. Is kind of helping folks think through that and seek support and all of that. I think some of them maybe would leave if they could find something that was, if they thought that there was a life-giving path to go elsewhere. But there's a lot of obstacles in their way, all the things that we talked about. I mean, it's their job, it's their livelihood, it's all of their social connections. They don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like so many burdens to overcome in order to leave. And especially for some of the guys, a lot of the local Idahoans that stay in are very fundamentalistic in mindset. But a lot of the other guys that aren't fundamentalists are folks that come from other countries, and they've been incarnated, they say, into this diocese, and and that creates yet another barrier to leaving, because they maybe their immigration status is tied to their employment, or even if they're full citizens, there's probably extra mental barriers to leaving. Am I going to be able to find another job in another field? How am I going to make those connections? And I'm not even, maybe I've got a strong accent. English isn't my first language.
Yeah. And I'm sure that if there was somebody in that situation and they come across this video and they don't know what to do, they could try to contact the Clergy Project, and yes. I'm sure hopefully there'd be somebody that would be able to help in some way, even being able to translate.
Yes, it may, and even come up with ideas for where to work,
Yeah, what to
for where to
do.
work, where to find employment. Um, maybe just the assurance that you can make a plan, even if you don't have all the answers right away. Make a plan. And from my perspective, so there's a phrase in the gay community that there was a whole campaign associated with a while ago. It gets better, the phrase is "it gets better," and the implication is it gets better when you come out. On the other side, there's another life, and it gets better. And
Yeah,
and I think that that's doubly true for so many folks in the clergy, many of whom might be gay. Certainly
yeah,
within the Catholic Church, within the priesthood anyway, I would say there's a lot that are gay. It gets better. There really is a path. It's not crazy. Um, we thankfully this country and the world that we live in has increasing tolerance for all those of us who are atheists or non-religious.
hmm. It not only gets better, but it's totally worth it.
It
It
is.
it may be hard for a little while, but I mean, especially if they were to come and join the clergy project, so many of us could rally in to help and say, this is what worked for me.
Hmm.
Plus, they also have within the clergy project help counseling to get to find a new job, as well as using the secular therapy project for therapy, which is also very similar and kind of tied together with recovering from religion. Into, I think you had mentioned that with your fiance, that he had gone
Hmm.
through that.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of resources out there to get support and to join online support groups and really just bounce some ideas off of other people.
Hmm. I know the even though I haven't been very active with the clergy project, I would say in general, just the knowledge that there's a community out there, and even just reading some of the posts sometimes was helpful to me,
Yeah,
even years later, because there was somebody else who had that experience.
yeah, yeah. It was definitely really nice because I felt like I felt like when I came out, there was a pool of people that were really pretty small that had come from religion and lost their faith. And then obviously an even smaller group of people that were leaders or clergy of some kind and had lost their faith. And so I didn't know who to talk to. And it was kind of the first place that I had found that there were other people that were like me. And I had talked to another priest just the other day. I don't know if you've talked to him or not. I feel comfortable saying his name because I put his YouTube video out, but Greg Buffkin, he wasn't a
Oh yeah,
Catholic
I
priest,
watched the
but
video. Yeah,
oh, you did? Yeah. But he
I
was
did.
he was an Episcopalian
Hmm.
priest. And I found it interesting too that um they were allowed to get married.
Hmm. Yes.
That's definitely different. And so I was really interested to hear more about the celibacy and all of those different aspects. It really is interesting because you notice different things than I did. You pointed out the contraception and the celibacy and stuff, and that's far different from one of my first thing that got me going in my head.
Right. I don't get me wrong.
So many things.
There were so many things.
Probably.
So definitely church teaching on sex and sexuality or lack thereof. I mean, basically just reiterating codes from long ago without any real religious justification was the initial crack in my faith for sure. Because if the church was wrong on one thing, it's really easy to see that they're wrong on other things. So that was the first
Mm-hmm.
crack. But
Yeah.
I gradually moved away from faith entirely. I started, I mean, fairly early on, I kind of because I was in grad school, and I had really smart theologians that were teaching me, that were my professors, and I would come up with some of these formulations that some of the really smart Catholics would describe, like a doctrine is like a spotlight, that it's pointing at God, and God's still larger than any formulation that we could describe, but it's like a spotlight pointing at God. And I'm like, well, okay, I kind of like that. Like, that recognizes that God's bigger, but I kind of like that. And so that worked for me for a little while. That helped me hang on to faith for a little while. And then I kind of came to, well, maybe God's not really a person, but God's bigger. Maybe God is like the universe. Okay, that got me along for a little while. I could kind of
like a deistic point of view.
yeah, intercessory prayer is kind of silly, but to pray for safe travels seems silly, but maybe there's some prayer that's like aligning us with the divine universe or something like that. That carried me for a little while. But then ultimately I kind of got to the point of like, well, if God is the same as the universe, like what's the point of the term God? Why not just call the universe the universe? Why call God God? If God's the universe, let's just do away with the term and let's just call it the universe. And
you got it.
and as I kind of I dissected gradually through that, I kind of got to the point of, well before I actually left, I was not a believer in anything about the religion.
So you felt like you were an atheist for quite a while?
Yeah, it took me a while to embrace the label. I would say I did not embrace the label atheist until maybe a year or so after leaving, but I knew that I wasn't really a believer very early on within my ministry.
Wow, that's wild. But it was kind of, like you were saying, it was a little bit of a survival tactic that you just kind of had to put on a mask for a little while. And I'm really glad that you took off the mask and you didn't stay in there for very long. And it was only a few years and you're able to live how you want to live.
Me too. I'm very happy where I ended up in life. And so there's a sense in which when I'm looking back, like, okay, would I change, yes, I would change things. Do I have regrets? And there's moments where I feel really angry at some of the lost opportunities of my earlier youth. But I know that the folks around me that inculcated me in the religion, including like my parents, I know that they were victimized by the religion too. And so I can't really blame them for it because I know that they are also victims of the religion. And in any case, I ended up in a good place today. I'm very happy with who I am today. I'm very happy with my job. I'm very happy with my life. I'm very happy with how I live and who I am. It gets better.
Yeah. That's really awesome. So, that's a great piece of advice. Normally I end it with asking, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who may be in the same situation you were in? And it gets better is obviously amazing. Do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
There's if you're thinking about leaving, let yourself think that through. Come up with that plan and find somebody trusted to talk to about it. You'll probably find that there's more openness to that than what you think. I certainly did. I did encounter some hostility. I did encounter some folks who distanced themselves from me, but less than what I thought. I found the other side of things to be very life-giving.
Yeah, very free, liberating.
Yeah, and I would personally, certainly if anyone is thinking about leaving, and the Clergy Project has a whole community of folks that have experiences to share, I'm happy to engage, to share, to listen to somebody and reflect with them.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, it was really great getting to know you.
You as well.
Your story is really fascinating, and it's going to help a lot of people are definitely a lot of people out there that are in the same position that you were in. And I really hope that they come across this and it helps them realize if they're losing their faith, or if they're in a position like you were, where they're just kind of suppressing who they are naturally, that they can find a way out. It's worth it.
Yes.
And I am so happy for you. Happy on your wedding coming up. When is your wedding?
It isn't this upcoming July, so I think we're going to do it in our backyard.
Oh, fun.
It should be quite a celebration. I may be crazy for doing it in my backyard, because we're currently going through all the logistics of it. I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I need to elope, but but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, you got to have fun. Well, awesome. I hope you guys have a really great wedding, and I am so glad that I got to meet you and talk with you.
Likewise. Thank you very much for this idea of doing interviews. When I saw that you were doing it, I saw your post about it, I just thought, oh, that's a really great idea, and that was what led me to contact you for it.
I just feel like there's so many people out there that are in the same position that we were in, and they don't know about it. And maybe hearing stories from people who actually were clergy, I mean, hopefully it's got to help some people out there.
I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah. And so I really appreciate you being vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you.